list. Who was that? You asked bibliology. Yeah, this is some I have collected because actually I have very few psychology book with me here. I have a lot at home. I didn't bring psychology books at all, only except one. So I like to finish psychology today and then move to ethics next week at least. So I think we began our discussion on guilt as a psychological phenomenon, or is it a reality in our life? Yes. What is actually guilt? To a psychologist, I mean secular, guilt is simply a feeling of the mind that I have done something unacceptable to the society. That's their viewpoint of guilt. I have done something not acceptable to the society. But to a Christian psychologist, guilt comes because of I have violated something God has commanded, or I have done something that is contrary to God's nature. So the approach or the view of guilt is totally different for a Christian and a secularist. Society sets the norm for the secularist. As long as you are living in harmony with the society, there is no reason for guilt. That's what the secular psychologists say. But we know that's not true. Simply because somebody is living in the society of thieves and robbers and he is robbing and the society does not condemn him, does not mean that he is not guilty, nor that he doesn't have guilt. Guilt actually is a result of the mechanism that God has set in man's mind, in conscience. When he violates that standard God has set, then, that sensitive mechanism tells us that you are wrong, you are wrong. So the secularist is actually very much wrong. So, but to a Christian conscience is in the pristine stage, that is, at the stage when it is not polluted or it's not violated, in the pristine stage, it's a God's voice in man saying you have violated divine rule or mandate. You are guilty before God. To the secular psychologist, guilt is not personal because the society is evil. People do nothing individually wrong, they will say that. The society has set either a standard which the individual can never reach, or the society, because of its religious bias, expecting the people to do certain things that are not normal for the individual to do, such as, you don't want to pray. Who wants to pray? Average individual doesn't want to pray. But the Christian society in which you are growing up, it told you from childhood that if you do not read Bible and pray, you are wrong. You have committed a sin before God. So all day you feel guilty because you did not read the Bible. The secular psychologist will say that, see, this is a classic example. Why you have to read Bible? An old book written by some people? No relevance that book has for today. 2,000-year-old the New Testament and 4,000-year-old about in the Old Testament. Why should you feel guilty? You should be feeling guilty if you don't read the newspaper today, because the newspaper carry what happens today. Even there they will say you don't need to feel guilty unless there is no law says that you have to read newspaper. So guilt is something that the society produces, they say that. The person hasn't done anything wrong in not reading the Bible or praying, because he was just doing what naturally, he likes to do or not likes to do. Why should you feel guilty? So they will say that guilt is actually something that belongs to the society. It is a society that should feel guilty for making this person required to read Bible. And when he fails, giving him the guilty feeling. So they will say that with the individual also. A child has done something wrong. Well, the parents rebuke the child. So the child is feeling guilty. The secular psychologist will say that why should the child feel guilty? The child is not measuring up to the standards his parents have set. But why should the parents set standard for the child? Let the child do what he wants. As long as the child does not hurt the society in which the child is. So they will say that any person is free to do anything. The only time when it is to be counted wrong is when he hurt somebody. That's all. But we know better. We know better. Far better than that. Whatever they say that person feels guilty because he has violated God's law. That is written right in his heart. So each time a man rebels against God, he is committing a sin. And the feeling of guilt that results from this rebellion is entirely justified. Psychological guilt is actual and cruel, wrote Francis Schaeffer. But Christians know that there is also real guilt, moral guilt, before a holy God. It is not a matter of only psychological guilt that is the distinctive. There is moral guilt, guilty before God. Psychological guilt, they will simply say that, this is what the society creates and all that,
What is that statement? Somebody else quoted?
Yes, it is Francis Schaeffer, a great man. Yeah. If you have read something. He said, but Christians know that there is also real guilt, moral guilt before a holy God. It is not a matter of only psychological guilt. That is the distinction. There is the moral, spiritual guilt, violating God's law. In another sense, guilty of what? Guilty before whom? That's the question. Francis Schaeffer will say, you are guilty of violating God's law. You are guilty before God. Only Christians acknowledge objective guilt before a holy God. And for this reason, only Christians could speak about real, personal, objective guilt that produces subjective pain or agony. Objective guilt is you are violating an objective law. Thou shalt not commit dash, dash, dash. You have committed dash, dash, dash. So you have committed an objective sin. That produces what? Your subjective pain, because you are the author of it. You have done it. Therefore, in your heart, you are feeling the pain. You are objectively guilty before God. God condemns you. God will punish you unless you get right with God. But for a psychologist, there is nothing called an objective guilt. Because any principle you think you violated has been set wrongly by the society. So it cannot be. It cannot be. When a man breaks moral and psychological principles, rules, boundaries, he is confused because he has feelings of real guilt within himself. A Christian psychologist will deal with the objective side of the violation first and then come to the subjective part of the feelings. That's the way it is. A Christian psychologist will always deal with the objective part. What did you do? That's the question. What did you do? Sir, I have committed this. Yes. You know what you did is a clear violation of God's commandment. And if you violate God's commandment, then you are feeling that subjective guilt because, you are guilty before God. God has put in every man a mechanism whereby he should feel bad when he violates God's law. The only way you can get right is but getting right with God. You tell God that you have violated, you feel sorry, and find out what is the solution that God requires. It's not as easy as in other religions. In other religions, it's very easy. You violate some law. The story goes that there was a man His name was Kesava. One day he was exceedingly hungry. There was nothing in his home to eat. He looked around what to eat. He saw a dog coming in. It was a real black dog. He hit it on the head and killed it. And, well, he roasted it in the fire and he ate. After eating the dog, he felt guilty. So, when he felt guilty, extremely, he went to the pujari, the Brahmin pujari. So the pujari asked him, what did you do? He said, I ate a dog. So what was the color? It was black. What was the firewood you used? There is a tree in Malayalam called Kanjiram. I don't know exactly what is it, wormwood or something, Yes, he said that the fire I used was wormwood. Well, he said, it's a sin, very terrible sin you have committed. You have to go 7 times to hell. So he said, what's the solution? Well, you make a silver dog and bring it to me. So he went, made a silver dog, and he brought to him. So the pujari took it and said, Kalina Garuttadanangilum, Kesavan Dinnadanangilum, Kanjiram Vraganangilum, Papamilla, Pukolam. That's how it is, But it doesn't happen like that in Christian, principle. Yes. Kalina Garuttadanangilum, Kanjiram Vraganangilum, Kesavan Dinnadanangilum, Papamilla. Who said it? Pujari said it. Well, that sort of guilt, you cannot get rid of guilt like that. You have to, follow what God says, not what Pujari says. Yes, but a lot of people are following what the priest in certain denomination says or something.
It doesn't work. I think people go back with certain sense of relief.
Yeah. It's always like that, Even when you have a heart attack, you drank something, some carbo, mixture something, thinking it may be a gastric pain, you feel a temporary relief. Yeah. Your problem remains, but it's a subjective feeling. It's a subjective feeling, so you always feel. But it doesn't make you any better. It doesn't make you any better.
Because you can't measure guilt. That's why we're just asking.
Well, you don't need to measure guilt actually, yes. Yes.
Because we can't measure, we think that it has subsided or it has gone.
That's many things.
Even that
pain cannot be measured, guilt cannot be measured, pleasure cannot be measured, There are many things that are, when the experience is subjective, it cannot be measured. For any measurement, you have to have an objective measure, weight, volume, mass, density. You can weigh them. But when you say that your feelings, elation, depression, you cannot measure them. It goes up and down. But the feeling is real. You suffer the miserliness of the feeling or the exaltation of the feeling. That's the real part. You cannot deny it. So, you can measure certain things that are objective. Subjective cannot. You can know how many degrees of fever you have because you have a thermometer. But how cold you feel when you have the fever, you cannot measure how cold I feel. Oh, one more blanket, one more blanket. Coldness cannot be measured. Temperature can be measured. The interesting thing is your body is very hot, 103 degree, 4 degree, but you are feeling cold. See that? So objectively you have fever, subjectively you have coldness. That's because when your body is hot and little cold winds blowing on you, you will feel very terrible. Very terrible. That's why it is. So some things cannot be measured does not mean it's not real. It's real. It's real. So the Christian psychologist will deal with the objective part of the guilt and then will come to the subjective part. The subject. First they will deal with what principle you have violated what principle of God? First commandment, second commandment, third commandment will go like that. Then we'll establish the crime that you are guilty before God because you have violated this and this commandment. God gave His rule. You cannot violate His rule. You will suffer consequences. This is not the punishment. This is simply telling you that you are guilty. God will make the judgment. But He is giving you now a period of time to get right with God. This feeling is for that. If you don't get right, you will be produced before the judgment seat, the white throne. There you will be dealt with. But before that, why don't we settle it? That's the secular psychologists, they have no way of settling these problems, no. Because for them sin, there is nothing called sin objectively. It is only that which the society does not approve. So they will try to make the society change. That's what they will do. They will make the society change. Or they will take this person from this society and put him in another society where these things are approved. Okay? Fine. Now how you feel? Oh, I'm very happy. Why? Because I can do all these things. There's nobody to tell me that I'm wrong. Everybody is doing it. This is perfectly right. Actually, his problem is not gone anywhere. No, its problem is not gone. So only Christianity could successfully deal with the problem of guilt, since only they understand the nature of man. Others don't. Well, psychology and mental illness. Probably that's where most of the people face psychology. When they have a mental problem, they go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and then, he will be labeled, he is a mental patient. But Christian psychologists differ from secular ones on the issue of mental illness. Christian psychologists see sin as a basic problem for wrong behavior. Christian psychologists generally deny that there are many mental illnesses. We don't call people mentally sick people. We call them spiritually sick people. The mind is reacting to the spiritual violations. That's what it is. The mind is reacting. There is no way you can get away from that reaction. No way. A child has violated the rule of the father. Father told him very clearly that you should not, take certain things on his table, like there are important papers there, all these things, but the child went in and he took those papers and he scratched there and here and all that. The father came, the table is a mess. So the father calls him, what did I tell you? Not to take anything. What did you do? I have taken it. Why? This is the question. Actually, the child begins to feel guilty even before that. He will avoid the father because he knows. See, that's a spiritual problem the child is having. The avoidance is simply the reaction to that, his wrong reaction to the spiritual problem. He should have run to the father and say that, Dad, I have violated the law. Give me the punishment, whatever, because I deserve it. But what child will say that? No child will say that. Because we know the nature of man. If right from Adam and on, man does not admit his, sin unless he is cornered. That's the only time they admit. But even spiritual people, that's the way. It's very difficult for us to admit our problem, our pride, all that. We wanted to justify what we have done. So Christian psychologists, they will really have an encounter. In psychology counseling, it is called encounter. They say that today I have an encounter session with so-and-so, please pray. The encounter session has to be genuine, real and tough. At the same time, it has to be reasonable because, otherwise that will be the end of the counseling session, if you are too rough. But if you are too mild, your counselor will always exploit you. There are professional counselors. They have gone to dozens of counselors, and they begin to manipulate the counselor. The moment they feel that I cannot manipulate this person, they quit, come to the next one. So he will tell the counselor, doctor, don't you think my problem is this? Exactly. So don't you think that I should do this really to get over it? This is his approach. So very soon he said that. So he said, you came here to counsel me? If you know this much, then why you came here? That's where they go, because they have become very professional. They don't want the psychologist to lay their hands upon the real issue. Want to put the blame on the wife when he is guilty. Want to put the blame on the child when he is guilty. Want to play the blame on the servant when he is guilty. On the parents while he is guilty. The neighbors when he is guilty. Very interesting. And so the Christian psychologist will really will have an encounter session. He will let them talk and say that now stop talking the lies, come to the truth. My time is precious. I don't want to hear all these lies. I don't believe anything you said. I know they are not truth. Come on. He needs to realize that. Of course, unless you know for sure what he said is lie, don't tell him. Because that's unethical. Then you are not qualified. Most of this people come for counseling, they already made up a story. They already made up a story. And that story will sound very appealing, convincing. Yes. They themselves think if the person will ask this counter question, I have this answer. Yes. So the counselor has to keep listening, and he has to get hold of his hand on certain, strings that he is having with the problem. So, it's usually not the mental problems, it's a spiritual problem. The spiritual problem, most of them. There are few mental problems. We are not saying there are not mental problems. That most of it is just spiritual problem.
Spiritual problem means he or she is possessed by the evil spirit within.
Oh, no. Suppose you are a constant, you are a habitual liar. You are habitual liars. Lying is a violation of a spiritual principle. Thou shalt not lie, right? So it's a spiritual problem. Yes. Unless he deal with this issue of his habit of lying, he cannot solve his problem, because every time he lies, his conscience is pricked. It's easy to say one lie, but it's not easy to stop with one lie. You will say another a dozen lie before you can stop lying, because a lie needs a lot of support. Truth cannot support lie. So you have to fabricate lie upon lie to support it. Then finally what? Like your domino playing, the whole piece is falls down. It cannot stand. It cannot stand. So it's a spiritual problem. Sometimes dishonesty with the wife is a spiritual problem. Dishonesty with the husband is a spiritual problem. Dishonesty in money matters is a spiritual problem. But the counseling may be making up stories that, sound very, very good. He is a very charitable person. He has been using the money, to help the poor, the needy on the road, the sick, and this. All the while he was using the money for sinful purposes. So he will bring out number of stories. And you need to get, the thing is, when a person is lying, you can add some flavor to lie, but the lie will never sound like truth. That's the way. The cross-examination, those who are speaking the truth, they don't have to remember what they said for the first question. Others have to remember. So if the lawyer, cross-examiner, asks back and forth question, he forgotten what he said for the first question, then the second question, so he will definitely make contradictions. And then the court knows that he was not a truthful person. Because truth comes automatically. Left and right, the truth will stand. But the lie that you are presenting as truth, it cannot. It cannot. How long it can? So it's easy to say one lie, but it's never easy to stop with one lie. You have to keep on lying. So when you are dealing with the mental people, you first of all wanted to make sure it's a mental problem. The secular psychologists will call it all mental illnesses. And they have medicines for it, they have hypnotism for it, there are so many sessions for that which are unbiblical. But for a Christian, no. A sin is a sin and it has to be confessed. It can be found forgiveness only in Christ Jesus, and reconciliation has to be made with those he sinned against. That's the only way. So what is mental illness? According to J. Adams, any of you know J. Adams? J. Adams is the exponent of a theory of counseling called nouthetic counseling. Nouthetic counseling. One of the best system of counseling in the world is nouthetic. The word nouthe, in the Greek means to exhort a person, to admonish a person, using the word of God. It's a biblical terminology, admonish one another. So he always using the scriptures, he will admonish people. He will show it from the scriptures where he is wrong, what commandment. So he is in the nouthetic. He does not believe that there are many mental cases at all. So he says, according to J. Adams, organic malfunctions affecting the brain that are caused by brain damage, tumors, gene inheritance, glandular or chemical disorders, and such a few cases are the only cases that we could call mental problems. Mental problems. All the other cases are spiritual problems. All the other cases are spiritual problems. And very few people have these kind of problems, Some people have, but not very many. Most of the people that come for counseling are not mental cases. They are spiritual cases. So he says that every elder or every pastor must be trained to counsel people, handle these things. Because that's what after all Bible says. If any of you is sick, let him call for the elders of the church. And then what should do? Let him pray for, and let them confess one to another. That's a confession. Confession is always of sin. So that means that more party involved than one. That is a confession of sin. So they are all brought in by the elders, and they are encountered. They are shown you have violated God's law, and then ask them to confess one another and forgive. Problem will be over. This is exactly what God required Job and the three friends to do. Three friends were accusing Job continuously, causing unnecessary pain for him. So they were to bring sacrifices, and Job was to pray for them, means he has to counsel them, he has to forgive them, he has to pray for God. Then Job's case was healed, and God also forgiven them. So that sort of a spiritual, it is a spiritual field. For that reason, I believe we don't need, it may be good to have one or two professional counselors that we have access to, because there are many sort of cases there. But generally, every elder in the church, at least one elder in the church, must be trained to deal with most of the problem, because most of the problems are spiritual problems. Husband-wife problems, parent-children problem, problem. Some believers cannot keep their job. They're constantly fired from the job. They will always blame on the employer, this and that. They want always to give the picture that they are martyr for truth. The simple fact is that either they are lazy, they are not measuring up to the job or something, and they are frequently frequently fired. It's not the case where the company does not have a work now or contract now. That's not the case. But people coming constantly for late, disturbing others at work, using unethical things, all manners and there, or they lose their job, and then they definitely wanted to. What you can do is you can close that. Push it. Yeah. Yeah. So J. Adams doesn't think that there are very many. Yes. Most of the so-called mentally ill people are those with long unsolved personal spiritual problems. Most of the people say that. They are long-standing problems, for husband-wife problem, for example. It has been years. It's going on and going on and going on. Now it has come to the stage where the husband accuses the wife of being a mental patient. The wife is not a mental patient, or the wife is accusing the husband. My husband is a mental case, brother, What should I do? Trying to get sympathy. When this problem started? Well, it started many years back. How it started? So when you have an encounter session with both of them separately, you get two versions of the problem. Exactly two versions of the problem. And then you have both of them together and have the encounter. Then you can just see that accusing each other, fighting each other right before you. Everything she said, he will refute, and everything he said, she will refute. Yes. One wife kept on accusing the husband of those so many violations. He did this, he said this, he said this. So the turn come to the husband and say, what do you say? My wife has only one problem, sir. I have no accusation. She only says lie. That's all her problem. So all that she has spoken for 3 hours, he said, she only says lie. That's all her problem. And this is the sort of thing. And you consider it now, who is really sick? Yes. So J. Adams is very right. Most of the so-called mental illness, they are not actually mental cases. They are unsolved personal problems of an outstanding nature. Unless we acknowledge and understand the real nature of sin, we cannot solve many of these so-called mental problems. Yes. Now it's very interesting that when this sin prolongs and sinful habits continues for a long time, you cross the boundaries of normalcy, you behave absurd. J. Adams has dealt with cases. I have taken a course under J. Adams, anesthetic counseling, And J. Adams, so there were cases. A man brought in. He won't take bath, don't cut hairs, get his hair cut, never brush. He will, answer the call of the nature right where he's sitting on his bed. He will eat food there, everything. So everybody says he's a mental case. Well, he was brought in for counseling. He knew it is a spiritual problem. No, he has no mental problem. He is only acting up for sympathy. So he came to him and, he did the same thing. Right in his counseling room, he did number 1 and number 2. Wife said, this is a problem. Can you help? Now you know what's the problem. I know what's the problem. So close the door. Told him, when you clean up that mess, go inside the bathroom, take your baths, then you will get some food. Until then, you will stay in that room. He stayed there for a week. When he found he was not getting any sympathy, no food, he cleared the mess, he went into the bathroom, he took a bath, he came out. That's all was his problem. Will you believe that? I couldn't believe that, to be honest. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody who has a spiritual problem. There may be mental cases, but this man was, he wanted his wife to punish his wife by making her to clean all these things and bathing him, feeding him. He wanted to persecute her by making him a burden on her. And then she came to a place where she refused to do it anymore. So the problem is there, So sometimes that's the way it is. Everybody who claims sick and can go to work is not really sick. They are not really sick. Heard of a woman whose both hands are like this, she cannot move the hands, lift or no. She was taken to many doctors, they couldn't find any problem. Finally brought to a psychologist. So said, I can move my hands, I can do nothing. No. How long you had it? For so long. The psychologist, what did he do? He just asked her to stand up. Our old Kerala Ammachi who wear this kachamuri and all, he got hold of the kachamuri and pulled it down. She immediately went. I was, so your hand moves, huh? She said, you have no problem. See, your hand was like this. Now you... That's all what it is. Now don't think that every Ammachi is like that. Not every Ammachi is like that. Some Ammachis are like that. The spiritual problem after some time, people begin to act absurd. Absolutely absurd. They will go to any extent. No. It's not a psychology. But children act it up. They're all dressed up, fed, and as soon as right 2 minutes before the bus comes, they vomit. Or they, pass out. Or they number 2. The mother say, okay, don't go today. In 5 minutes, they're out playing. This is a spiritual problem. They have trained themselves to do that at any time they want. If they don't want to eat something you're feeding, they don't like it. First of all they say this and that, and then afterwards sometime they understand that saying that is no use. So, either pretend you have a stomach pain or something and then you vomit it. Okay, that stops it. Some parents may sound cruel, but if you ask the child to clean up that mess, finish the rest of the food. Or I'm coming up with a rod. The child will do it, he knows. Game doesn't play. Children play games, yes. How can the child have a problem right before the time to go to school? He was okay. And in 5 minutes he is okay again. Many believers have this sort of problem on Sundays. A headache. Saturday, all 6 days, no problem. Monday again, no problem. But only on Sunday this headache. Oh, it's a terrible headache. And to such people I say, I have medicine for them, This headache will not come for 40 days. You know what that is? Yeah. You come to my home, I'll treat it. All headaches will go for 40 days. Back in Kerala, there is what is called adiville. You know what that is? To catch the mouse and all that. Boom! You just ask him to look there and put one of those, boom! And that for 40 days the pain here only. No pain up there. It's only, ask, how is your headache? No headache, brother. This is the problem. That's okay. Your headache is gone, right? Yeah. Many people have this spiritual problem, they. Yes. It's a terrible problem, You must say it's a terrible problem. Yes. So one accusation of secular psychologists against Christian psychologists and Christian counseling is that they put too much guilt on people, calling their problem sin. Well, what else you want to call them? Fun? Is that what you want to call them? When a person does things like this, we Christians call it sin. Yes. Swami Vivekananda said, the greatest sin is to call man a sinner. What else you want to call a person who rapes, murders, steals? A saint? I think Swami Vivekananda, a bright mind, but something wrong. Yeah, some spelling mistake somewhere. Yes. So Christian psychology, rejects psychotherapy completely. All sorts of, there are many branches. Freud has his psychotherapy, Skinner has his, Rogerian psychotherapy. There are all these classes, different classes of psychology. They all have psychotherapy. Christians don't have psychotherapy, no. Christians have confession, encounter sessions followed by confession sessions, followed by reconciliation session. That's what it is. You are encountered, convinced of your sin, you acknowledge it, confess before God, go and reconcile with those you offended. That's the only way you can do. Because man has a conscience and that he has rebelled against God, he is bound to experience real guilt. This guilt is acknowledged by Christian psychologists and points the person to Jesus Christ. The hurting person is brought to Jesus Christ, who alone can take away the sin problem. Our sins need to be washed by the blood of Christ. There's no other way. So we don't immediately say you are a sinner or anything, but the encounter session sometimes will last for 2 or 3 weeks sometimes, because depends upon the people, because they will continue to refute, and continue to defend themselves, paint a good picture. But you need to keep on the encounter until they break down and they say, yes, I am guilty, I am wrong. I am guilty, I am wrong. Once they admit that, you have good hope, because repentance is to be followed by confession of sin before the Lord, and Lord forgives. So the Christian psychologist always trusts personal accountability and responsibility for the problems he faces. In counseling, you should never try to take the accountability from that person and put on somebody else, either the society or a relative or a system. No. You try to put the accountability there. I am accountable for what I have done. Yes, I am accountable for what I have done. Others may have done wrong. Somebody slapped on my face, I slapped back. Who is accountable for slapping back? I am. The other man is accountable for slapping me, but I am accountable for. Yeah. You can never say I slapped him only because he slapped. No. Suppose it was a police inspector, would you have slapped back? No. So, you are responsible. That fact will have to be. He will try to defend that, but, but I say, what? But I don't want to say. What does the Bible say? What did the Lord say? Did somebody slap you? Yeah. I said, brother, but I have not reached that. You tell that. I am guilty and I know I have not reached that state. But the fact that you have not reached that state does not excuse you. No, it doesn't excuse. How will you reach that state? That stage. Keep on slapping somebody who slapped you? That's the way you'll reach? No, when you take a couple of slaps without slapping back, then you will reach very soon at that stage. You say, now I can take insult without, retribution, revenge. So we need to bring this issue, the stressing the personal accountability of a person who is having this problem. Without this, the counseling will never acknowledge his guilt before God, caused by his personal sins.
One doubt.
Yeah.
See, how does this Christian counselors approach the person, suppose he's a believer and if he's not a believer?
Well, the believer will always be counseled by the Bible standard. The non-believer cannot be given that biblical counseling that way, So our counseling will be, we will always counsel, suppose it's a property case between a believer and unbeliever or some money borrowing and giving and all that, we will always encounter the believer separate sessions. And it will show that what your business was first of all wrong, because what fellowship the believer has with the unbeliever. And, the way you reacted, that was not the Christian way of reaction. So you have to go and first of all, before God, you have to admit that, okay, maybe this business partnership that I have entered into was wrong against your rule. I'm a believer and he's an unbeliever. We are never supposed to have, this sort of partnership with an unbeliever. Secondly, when what I have done is wrong as a Christian. For a non-Christian, it may be right, but a Christian, it's wrong. So you have to go and confess that sin before the other person, whatever he has done, Yes, then we will deal with him, We will tell him that, you are not a believer. That does not make your action correct. What you have done is wrong. The non-believer will come for, a lot of non-believers have come for counseling. It's very interesting that, it's a lot more easier sometimes to have the encounter with the non-believer than the believer. Because a believer, when he sins, he usually sins a willful sin. For a non-believer, the sin is usually habitual. That's the way he has always been. But the believer, in spite of the warning of the Holy Spirit and the teaching of God's people and all, he has done it. For example, a believer who marries a non-believer. Usually the non-believer can be very easily convinced this marriage was not according to God's standard, because Bible says she will acknowledge and she probably will very soon get saved also. Yeah, that's from experience. But for this person to be brought to the place where he will confess and admit and confess before the church that I was wrong, I was doing it in violation to the word of God and the counseling of the church, that I ask unconditional forgiveness of the church, that admitting before the Lord and the church that I was wrong, it will be very difficult to bring him to that position. Because it is out of the hardness of the heart he has done it. The other person usually do it out of either the weakness of the flesh or out of ignorance, whatever it is. She was unbeliever, or the unbelieving partner said that I never knew their Bible prohibits that. He always said I'm a Christian, but he never said that I'm not supposed to marry a non-Christian. He would have told me I would not have married. Now tell me what should I do, But the Christian, he hardened his heart, it's very difficult for him. So I have found that it's very difficult to counsel and a believer on certain issues. Yes. But then, you have to counsel him, but then a little harsh and you sometimes not profitable. Not profitable.
We have contact only with the unbeliever.
Yeah.
So when he comes with a problem, so how should we approach?
The unbeliever. The unbeliever will approach his problem as say husband-wife fight. Okay. He is in the habit of beating his wife, for example. Maybe his wife is disobedient or whatever, he's overspending, this and that. He may have certain charges, but he is beating. We will just show him that physical violence against one's wife is wrong, legally, morally, and then say that spiritually, So you are guilty on 3 counts, The spiritual part, I being a Christian, I always show from the Bible. This is God's norm. It's not for Christian only, it's for everybody. Husbands, love your wives. It's a commandment not only for Christian husbands, it's for all husbands. Marriage is honorable for all, not only for Christians, but for Muslims or Hindus. Marriage is honorable for all. There are certain rules and laws that are honorable for all. You have violated this. So that, well, according to your Bible it may be okay, but according to the rules of the law of the nation, are you guilty? Yes. Well, if the law of the nation you are guilty, you think the law of God is subservient to the law of the nation? Look, your common sense says that God's standard is much higher. So you needed to acknowledge that you are guilty before God, you are guilty before law, and you are guilty before the society, the man and everybody. And if you are guilty, what's the solution? Yeah? So you will counsel them. And of course, if the wife is also a non-believer, then you will counsel her also likewise. Your husband has pointed out certain areas where you provoke your husband unnecessarily. Why do you provoke? If your husband is coming late, there are many ways to find out why he is late. You can just go and ask lovingly, what happened? Today you are late. You don't have to say that, rash words. That sort of a reaction, So you are provoking. You cannot provoke a man. He will react. He is physically stronger than you. So definitely, you can expect that, You should not do that. So this sort of thing. So, it's not that difficult to counsel now. But in the course of the counsel, your mind is always to bring him to Jesus Christ. Once they admit that we are wrong, and then you can say that you can get forgiveness from your wife by asking forgiveness and then promising I will not repeat it. But for God, you just cannot get forgiveness like that. God is a holy, just God, you know that. Then you will slowly talks about how can you find forgiveness before God. And he may not accept, he may accept, depends upon. A lot of non-believers have come actually, Yes, some of them got saved and became Christians and started attending churches. Some of them don't, But actually, very few cases where you cannot help them. I could help them quite substantially. But there are cases where believers come, if, as I said, hardened believers. It's very difficult. Some, recommend, strong disciplinary action to the church. This brother has to be disciplined. Yes. Oh, some believers commit sin and they will try to justify it in many ways. Many ways. It's very difficult to deal with them, you know. Difficult in the sense that they will be arguing back and you know, and accusing you of being unkind and this and that, or taking sides with his wife, you know, that sort of, you know, they may use psychological pressures upon you. So you leave the counseling, you know. Of course, you always counsel with your wife. Whenever you are counseling a woman, you always have your wife with, never private counseling.
Uncle, same that what you said is right about the believer counseling and all. I have a case that one of my friend visited me towards, he is a believer. He did some mistake. About that, I told him about that. So you should be holy, you should follow Jesus Christ like that, more towards the holy path. After 45 days, I got call from him, and he said, again I did same mistake. So finally, so this you did second time, so I can't help you. I said like that because I hurted inside. Finally, he said that because God did nothing in my life, I hated Lord completely. I don't want to worship Him. So he said like that. So at this situation, what I have to do?
Well, you know, John said that if you see a believer sinning, a sin unto death. You don't need to pray for him, you know. But then the question is, what is that sin and all that, you know. That's a very technical question, you know. But if you are convinced that this person is sinning, a sin unto death, you cannot do very much. But if not, you can do a lot. You can follow up, you know. There are cases, I have dealt with a case which I don't feel sad because I knew that's bound to happen. A young man converted from Hinduism, he married a fine Christian lady. She lived in my neighborhood. They invited me also for the wedding, I also went. Then the second day after the wedding, this man walked into my home and told me, "Brother, I have come to make a request to you." I said, "What's the request?" "I want you to recommend for a divorce to her parents." It's only 2 days or 3 days, you know. Less than 1 week. You know, it's less than 1 week. I told him that that's nonsense. Anyway, I said, "Why you want a divorce?" He said, "Well, her body is not beautiful." Said, "Did you marry after seeing her?" "Yes." "You approved the marriage?" "Yes." "Why do you approve it?" "But I approved only because she was a very spiritual girl, very godly girl." Yeah, I said, "I believe she was a very godly girl." And I said, "What's wrong with her?" And this I was surprised. He said that, "Well, I have slept with many girls. Her body is not just beautiful, brother. It doesn't bring any emotion or feelings to me." I said, "You know, you are a born-again Christian." "Yes, I'm a born-again Christian." "You went Bible college?" "Yes. When I was in the Bible college, I will sneak out in the middle of the night, go to the prostitutes." And then he became an evangelist of another denomination. And now I go very many places for preaching and all, and not always, but on many occasions when I stay in different homes, I will have sex with somebody in the home. I knew he has gone way beyond. I dealt with him. I said, "No, never come here asking for a divorce. No." I don't believe in it. With that request, you should not come. If you want to come, have counseling for your marriage and all, you can come. But I said, "No, I don't want this marriage." So he left her after lived together for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. They left her. By that time, she was already, pregnant. A very godly girl, And he went away. He was from a Nair background. He came after 6 months. By that time, she was almost, 6-7 months pregnant, carrying, and he came one night. Came around 11 o'clock in my home. So I said, "Nair, What brought you here this hour? I want you to permit me to sleep in your living room for tonight. I said, no, I will not. Why? Well, I know why you came. I know exactly why you came. I did not recommend your divorce, right? So you want to hang on my fan. I said, I'm not. I'll give you money. Go to a lodge. I gave him money. He laid his head at the train and died. I knew he came to commit suicide in my living room. I told him, I have a wife and 5 children. I have a responsibility before God to guard them. Here, money. Gave him enough money to go to a reasonable restaurant, lodge and live. No, I knew. Because he has gone beyond all counseling and all that. He's a hardened sinner. God has to, that's the only way he can. He committed suicide. Some people say, why you didn't allow brother to sleep him? I said, well, no, I won't allow him. I know. I had no doubt.
How do you know he's looking for suicide?
Well, you can look at a fair person and say the determination of death on his face. When a person is ready to commit suicide, his whole manners change, he has no purpose for living, he is full of bitterness and everything, it's red on. And he knew, and he didn't say, no, I don't have any, that was exactly. I dealt with him long enough. He's a hardened criminal before God. It's just like Saul, Saul committed suicide, by falling on them. It will. There are cases and people like that. It's very difficult sometimes. That poor God, anyway, she gave birth to a beautiful daughter. But she suffered all her life, Then she had a second marriage, But this man was the brightest student in one of the biggest colleges in India, Bible colleges. Yes, straight 4.0 average student, very smart. Even I had a couple of times to speak in a Bible class that I was conducting before his marriage. What a tragedy, what a tragedy. Before he came to me, he went into her house, got his wedding pictures, everything that belonged to him. He didn't want it to. So I asked him, what is it? He said, it's my wedding pictures, everything that belongs. And I knew what is. He had written a note in his pocket to his sister, who was living very close to the place where he committed suicide. That his address, and said, I'm doing it deliberately, I wanted to do it, well calculated, planned, and I'm responsible for it. Sad, isn't it?
It's not out of guilt or anything.
It's out of guilt, yes. It's not really simply guilt. He cannot get a divorce, so he cannot marry somebody else. There is no valid ground any court will. If he goes to the court, he has to pay for her sustenance, because she is not the guilty party. She is still willing to live with him if he comes. Forgive him. He didn't want to take the responsibility. He tried to run away, but he couldn't. Yeah. So this sort of situations. Yes. Yeah, when you deal with people in counseling, you need to sense what's going through his mind also from his words. Another unforgettable experience in my life is when a classmate of mine committed a murder. It's a classmate of mine for his master's degree. No. He lived very close to my house, so we meet. So he just sought counseling at that time, personally we said, talk about, this is a problem. The next door lived a very beautiful woman, very, very beautiful woman, who, if gone for a competition, would have been selected as Miss India, so beautiful. This young lady was married to an engineer. And he wants this friend, to come to her home for illicit relationship. And he refused. Every time she put force. So she hired some thugs to kill him. Because she got many such people in her account. So those thugs tried to kill him on a couple of occasions. Hit him with motorbike, this and that and all. He knew that. And so he told me that, the night before that, and it seems like she wants to kill me. She will kill me if I don't do something drastic. He didn't say what the drastic was. So I just said, don't do anything drastic that amounts to murder or suicide. I didn't say anything. And the next day I saw him. He didn't come to the class, but I saw him in the afternoon. And he told me that, Thomas, I'm no more afraid of her. I didn't know that exactly. I said, why? No, I'm not afraid. He didn't tell me why. Oh, but I had fear in my heart that I didn't want to ask him, did you commit suicide? Then, then I knew, if he commits murder, then I knew the murder, then I'll be. So I didn't want to do that. So I said, okay, then I'll see you later. I immediately left. Next day morning, the news, in the main news, she was murdered. Cold-blooded murder by somebody. I knew it was. Yes. Yeah. He was caught very soon. It was very difficult for me to, accept the fact that somebody, so that was the discussion in the class. He was the best student. How could such a good student, so handsome, so young, so bright, a Brahmin, how could he commit such a cold-blooded murder? He confessed before the police everything. Well, he was not hanged. He was, I think, during Morarji Desai's term or something, every convict was given pardon. So he got out. I never met him again. I wanted to, but I don't know where he is now. Anyway, the counseling people is very, very difficult sometimes. Sometimes the counselors have to go to the case will be taken. Some counselor will leave a note accusing the counselor. Yeah, they said, I'm committing suicide because the counselor told me that I have no hope. But so I'm committing suicide. The police get that note and come and arrest you. So you usually have a videotaping of all conversations on counseling. Your files will be updated. You will write it down, then read to him. Okay, exactly this is what he said, what we said, right? Any changes? No, that's exactly what it is. So it's not always easy. It's not always easy. Yes. A real mental case you should never handle. It must go to a psychiatrist. Because such mental cases need medical treatment. You are not qualified, and a psychologist is not qualified, and a clinical psychologist is not qualified. But it's always a clinical psychologist who will decide whether it is a psychiatric case or a psychologist case. That's where standard procedure. In good mental hospitals and all that, there will be psychologists. The case will go to the psychologist. They will interview. They will put the file forward to the psychiatrist. This is a psychiatrist case. then only the psychiatrist will take it. Otherwise, the psychologist will deal with it, So what are we saying? Some would accuse the Christian psychologist as insensible to people with sensitive problems. However, in reality, what is more insensitive than to treat a critical HIV patient without acknowledging his problem? To treat HIV as mere fever is a joke and an insult. Yes. J. Adams is right when he said, it is important for the counselors to know that whenever clients camouflage, sick treatment only makes them worse. They may act as if they may be excused for their condition. It's the most unkind thing one can do. Such an approach only compounds the problem. That's what secularists do that. Oh, you are not responsible. Oh, don't worry. You're not responsible. We know. You're sick, brother. You're sick. You're not accountable for that murder. Because you're a mental case, Did you know you were killing a person? No, I didn't know that. No. What did you thought that? I was squeezing orange. Oh, yeah, I told you. You are not. That's the sort of approach, So, many people, they commit, very serious crimes, and then the psychologist will always they bring the file of the psychologist, and they say that, he was a mental case, that he was not in a mental state where he can discern the seriousness of his crime or activity. Boom. Court says, recommended for psychiatric treatment, not guilty. Not guilty. No. Cannot do that. So J. Adams is very right. The first step for the Christian counselor in dealing with many mental and spiritual problems is to hold the client personally responsible for the sin in his life. Larry Crabb represents another school, not nouthetic, but he is also a believer. Larry Crabb. He was a brethren man, I know that. He was the head of the counseling department of the seminary I went. After I completed there, then he came there. They started a department of counseling, giving master's degree in counseling. So his school is a little different. J. Adams is nouthetic counseling. J. Adams will say sin. He will put the label sin on 95% of the cases come to. And Larry Crabb probably will put that label only on 50%. He will say the other 40%, needs more compassionate treatment. Well, sounds good. And I think, So Larry Crabb says, hold your client responsible for what? For confessing his sins, for willfully and firmly turning from it, and then practicing the new behavior, believing that the indwelling Spirit will provide all needed strengths. Yes. J. Adams and Larry Crabb, they are, the same basic approach is the same. They all acknowledge that the counselee must be held responsible for his sins, and he must be brought to confession before God and a change in the behavior. Now this is the key for all. This is the key for all non-organic mental problems. Confession of sin, forgiveness of sin through Jesus Christ, reconciliation with God, and sanctification through the disciplining work of the Holy Spirit. These steps have to go through. 1 John 1:9, confession and forgiveness. 2 Corinthians 5:17-21, reconciliation with God. Sanctification through the work of the Holy Spirit. 1 Thessalonians 5:23, Hebrews 12:1-11. Christian psychology is summarized in James 5:16. Confession of sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The intense prayer of the righteous is very powerful. Righteous is very powerful. I think last week I cited the example of a wife calling me, around 3 o'clock in the morning, her husband was sick, such situations where the elders go, and I believe the elders could heal a lot of sicknesses, But it is not the elders' duty to find out that, no. The person knows whether God is dealing with him or not. When you are sick and you're taking medicine, no good, no healing, it only aggravates. And then your conscience says that the Lord is dealing with me, immediately call for the elders. Yes. There are situations in many cases. Many cases. Many cases. Yes. Such reconciliation is needed. The bitterness of heart, unforgiving spirit, loving sin secretly, that's a big problem. We have secret sins nobody knows, only God knows. But you love it. You claim to be all right before others. But you know that how either you are becoming poor in your studies, you cannot hold on to a job, or you are suffering in health, you are having different family problems, so many things, one after another. The Lord is dealing with you, but you are not acknowledging the fact that there is sin and getting right. Then finally, either you will be having a mental collapse, nervous breakdown, you may say, or your family life is broken down. Some sort of thing like that. It's terrible, isn't it? Very, very terrible. This sort of things happen. Once a brother has brought his neighbor, she claims to be a believer belonging to another church, another system. Her problem, she was becoming lean. So much, you can looking at her, you know that she got some problem. I thought she was having, TB. Well, yeah, she looks like she was having TB, but I doubted that, but I knew she was going through some very serious mental agony and problems that I knew. Of course, I had few sessions with her, and she said her husband is unloving and unkind and physical torture and in-laws problems and all that. But I knew it has to be more than that. Because in history, many wives have gone through in-laws problems and all these problems. Many drunkards will beat their wives and, but they are much better than this. Her gums will bleed and so many problems. The thing is that she was recommended to me by a medical doctor. Yes. And the doctor said, I think this is not a medical case, but it's a psychological case, if he can help. I tried to dealt with her, and then finally found out that it is the bitterness of the heart. She was unforgiving. Day and night, 24 hours, she is harboring that ill feeling and bitterness towards everybody who was against her. And in that bitterness, she couldn't eat well. Whatever food she eats cannot digest well. None of her systems, was working properly. None of her systems was working properly. And you can she was becoming, from a psychological case, she was almost going to look like a mental case, that sort of case. She was not taking bath properly, she was not keeping her hair down properly, she was not keeping her clothing, properly, not taking care of her children properly, she was not talking with anyone properly, What she was thinking and thinking and thinking, she was just asking the question, why should I leave? Why should I leave? Why should I leave? That's all. So I told her that, you are killing yourself. You are persecuting yourself. And I know your husband is not loving, is unkind, but that's not your problem. There are many other husbands who are more cruel than your husband, but yet they are all healthy and they are taken care of. In-laws' problem is not your problem, From interviewing her, I found that her in-laws were not that terrible bad. They were, but, like many village in-laws, they will have criticism for this and that, and that sort of thing, that's. But it's the unforgiving spirit. So, we need to get into the real crux of the problem. That you can find out only by, multiple encounters. The counselors have a system of pro formas and all, they have to fill up and they ask, and you have to study yourself. And then, I found out her case was not hopeless. It was just if she changed her mental attitude a little bit. So I told the doctor who brought that this is really the case, and I think he helped him. I show him the problem where, try to show her that your attitude, it's an attitude, negativism that is causing the problem. Negativism, Yes. So society and individual. Sorry, before that I wanted to, how did I go there? The problem of suffering. We all have to suffer. Pain is not a pleasant feeling. Secular psychologists will talk about a life full of happiness, health and wealth. They advise methods of successful living. Very good, very good. All these prosperity gospelers, that's what they all say. God loves you, God wants you to be healthy, wealthy and happy. Healthy, wealthy and happy. What success without dealing with basic issues that cause failures? Actually, secular psychology, instead of eradicating pain and agony, only brings more pain and more misery. They trivialize life problems. They trivialize pain, saying it is without meaning. Suffering they paint as some kind of absurdity, a mistake of society by handling the environment wrongly. No, it's not. Pain is a real thing, Pain is a blessing. Pain is a blessing. Why? Pain is one way, and the body is telling you that it needs special care. Okay? If your body is paining, aching somewhere, you cannot have a sufficient reasonable explanation for it, then you need to go to a medical doctor. That's where first you go, not to a psychologist, to a medical doctor, because the body is telling. Pain is also a method by which God is telling you that, hey, you are wrong. The grip of the Lord. Like David said, his hand was upon me heavy. The Lord sometimes keeps his hand is very heavy, So the heavy hand of God sometimes causes that pain. It's better to confess your sins, get right with God. So pain is a blessing. Pain is a blessing. Without pain, there is no meaning for pleasure. If there was no darkness in the world, how would you have enjoyed light? We enjoy light because there is darkness also. If there was no darkness, light is useful, but we would not have enjoyed it. The enjoyment comes because of that. The same way, if there was no thirst, you think you would have enjoyed water, drinking water? No. Because your body needs certain amount of water, you will drink it. You will force yourself, but you will never enjoy. Oh, but after you are so thirsty and your mouth is dry and know that somebody offers you a glass of, cold water. Man, like Paul said, he refreshed my soul. Onesiphorus, refresh my soul. That's refreshing. Yes. So pain is not that bad, no. If somebody say pain is bad, I say pain is not that bad. Actually, pain saves people. If a child is getting hold of the fire, if there is no pain, what will happen? The child will be completely burned off, right? The child pulls out the hand because of the pain. You step on some nail or something, you pull off your feet because it's pain. If there is no pain, the nail will go all the way in. Yes, so pain is not bad. But they will say that, oh no, pain should not be there, But we need to make the counselor to examine his life and see whether this pain is caused by God as a warning sign. Watch out, this is a red light. You need to change the oil. You need to put more brake fluid, otherwise the brake is going to come. You're going to have a nervous breakdown very soon. You are not going the right path. They believe that God uses pain and suffering to bring about positive changes in individuals, while the secular psychologists see pain and suffering as harsh realities to be avoided at any cost. The Christians see the hand of God in suffering, either to discipline the believer for his wrong, or a process of refining and polishing the person for greater usefulness. The loving Father chastises the Son. Christians are sometimes called to plunge joyfully into sufferings in obedience to God. Acts chapter 6, 8 to chapter 7, verse 60. Finding meaning in suffering is a feature unique to Christian psychology. William Kilpatrick, in his book Psychological Seduction, says, the real test of a theory or way of life, however, is not whether it can relieve pain, but what it says about pain if it cannot be relieved. That's the real test. The real test of a theory of or a way of life, however, is not whether it can relieve pain, but what it says about pain if it cannot relieve.
What's the name, William?
Relieve, yes.
William?
Its name is William Kilpatrick. 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 Only one L. Not kill, Patrick. Yes. So Christians, that pain is not all that bad. Oh no. Pain does a lot of good thing. The father had two sons. The father was very busy. He had no time for the children actually. He goes to business 7 o'clock in the morning, returns home 11 o'clock. When he goes to work, children are on bed. When he comes home, the children are. So only on Sunday, the holy day. Of course, that day he has to go to church and all these activities and all that. So practically it's too busy. So once the eldest son got really sick. He was in the hospital real sick. They almost feared that they will lose him. So he closed down his business for a week and was with the child, constantly with the child. Oh, the son loved that. The son loved it. The availability of the father almost 24 hours, where he will hold him, kiss him, and show the love and all that. Oh, he loved it. So, anyway, the son got well and returned home, but the younger son was full of bitterness. And he said, Dad, you don't love me. You have never spent a day with me. You closed down your business for a few days to be with my elder brother. So the father said that, son, you have never been sick. You know, his body was aching and needed daddy's, hand to massage to soothe it out. His eyes were tears were coming down, needed the eye of his father to wipe out those. But you are all the time running around and all that. And that's how true that, Sometimes even God's closeness and the sweetness of His arm we feel only when we are in trouble. When we are healthy and wealthy and happy, we are running around as if God is a stranger. If we happen to see Him on the way, we don't have time, we just